Welcome to the Analysts channel. This is Borys Tizenhausen with you. Today is August 17th. There are a lot of important news items in this episode. So Volodymyr Zelensky is flying to Washington. Ursula von der Leyen and several European leaders are flying with him. Trump has supported Putin's proposal. What was included in this proposal? And Putin is ready to give his most honest word that he won't attack either Ukraine or any European countries anymore. And of course he asks for the Russian Orthodox Church to return to Ukraine. What else does the Kremlin want? We'll talk about this and much more in today's episode. There's a lot of interesting stuff ahead. So if this is your first time on this channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. So, Reuters has published a list of demands from the Russian Federation, the main points of Putin's proposal to end the war. What does it include? First of all, there will definitely not be a ceasefire until a comprehensive agreement is reached. In other words, what Trump wanted, he won't do. But suddenly Trump wanted exactly the same thing that Putin wanted. Kyiv must completely withdraw its troops from the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. This is a key demand, completely. Russia freezes the front lines in the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions, and they return to Ukrainian control some areas in the Sumy and Kharkiv regions, very, very small areas. Let me get ahead of myself and say that Putin is demanding that our troops withdraw from territories. If we fully withdraw from Donbas, that would be from an area 15 times larger than the one he is willing to return in the Sumy and Kharkiv regions. The lifting, at least partially, of sanctions against the Russian Federation is another point. Formal recognition of Russia's sovereignty over Crimea. How is that even supposed to work? I don't understand. What does formal or informal even mean here? Ukraine will be prohibited from joining NATO. That's another point. You see, Putin, didn't bother with small demands. Well, I think this is exactly what they'll try to sell as demilitarization. Like, that's how it is. Or maybe they'll come up with something else. You know, when, in Iran they celebrated victory after their nuclear program was hit by American bombs, they went out to the squares to celebrate. They didn't care at all that their air defenses and nuclear facilities had been destroyed. Well, they'll probably come up with something similar here. Another point. It seems Putin is open to Ukraine receiving certain security guarantees. We'll get to that a bit later. How can NATO guarantee Ukraine's security? But the scheme is very cunning. We'll break it down. And of course, the rights of the Russian Orthodox Church must be freely exercised again on Ukrainian territory. Well, I guess they'll try to sell this as some kind of, denazification. There you have it, ROC, FSB. How could we do without them? Honestly, I don't know who's more effective, the Russian Orthodox Church, the FSB, or just the FSB, or maybe the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation. It really seems like they get much better results through the church. And so, Trump has essentially supported Putin's plan to hand over the part of Donbas controlled by Ukraine as a condition for a peace agreement. He stated this to Zelensky and European leaders after negotiations with Putin. This is now being reported by the New York Times. I think you've heard this news, and European officials confirmed that Trump told European leaders that, in his opinion, peace could be achieved quickly if Ukraine agreed to hand over the remaining part of Donbas to Russia. In general, you could achieve peace quickly if you just surrendered right away, even on the very first day. In fact, peace would have come immediately. Only it would have been the Russian peace that arrived. Well, Trump can't possibly not understand this. And how did it transform from "I'll impose sanctions" or "I'll show him now"? Oh, I've got them all in the palm of my hand. How did all of this transform? All right, I accept it. If Putin wants it, then let him have it. How did all of this happen at the snap of a finger? And in exchange for this, for the liberation of Donbas, Putin proposed to cease fire in the rest of Ukraine along the current front lines and to give a written promise not to attack either Ukraine or any European country again, according to European officials. A true pioneer's, or rather a Komsomol member's, honest word. Putin is ready to give that. Of course, we believe him. Well, what else? Let's go. But, the internet remembers everything. Both Putin's words that Crimea is Ukraine and his words that he wasn't planning to invade anywhere. The internet remembers all of this. So what are we supposed to do? And by supporting this proposal, naturally Trump diverged from the position of Ukraine and Europe, who continue to demand an unconditional ceasefire first, and only then everything else. And, this approach by Trump, of course, immediately gives Russia certain advantages. Remember, Trump said, now the ball is in Zelensky's court, right? Now it will depend on Zelensky whether there will be peace or not. No, he doesn't want to take responsibility. He came up with a new, simple way to shift the blame for not imposing sanctions and for not keeping his promise to impose them if Putin doesn't agree to a ceasefire. But look at how it works here. Now Zelensky will be the one to blame if he doesn't give up his land to Putin, land that Putin hasn't even conquered yet, and maybe never will. He hasn't occupied it, you understand? So, what do we do in this situation? Well, I won't repeat myself about the shameful meeting with Putin in Alaska, but here's the situation. Putin comes with his own proposal, and Trump comes with his own. Trump arrives and says, I want a ceasefire, that's it. I've got sanctions right here in my hand, you're finished, your economy is on its last legs. These are Trump's words, that Putin's economy is in a dire state. They both arrived with their own proposals. Putin told him, what, a ceasefire? No, that's not happening. Accept my demands. Trump came out and said, I've changed my mind. Now I don't want a ceasefire. I want the whole deal right away, just as Putin is asking me to. In other words, he completely accepted Putin's proposal, and this is without even mentioning the sanctions. That is, no, you don't hear the word sanctions anywhere anymore. A wonderful proposal, very good, absolutely fantastic. Ukraine will give up even more of its territory, and Russia won't leave the occupied areas. Let me remind you, Trump said something about some kind of territorial exchange. An exchange is when you trade something that actually belongs to you, not something you took, right? So what kind of exchange is this? Exchanging your own territory for your own territory, Ukraine's for Ukraine's. Well, what if something suddenly goes wrong? Let's just hypothetically imagine that everyone accepted such a proposal. Putin solemnly promised to ceasefire, withdraw, and end the war. He gets the territory freed for him. Of course, I doubt it would actually happen that way, but let's just say hypothetically, he gets the territory freed for him. He says, oh great, now I'm going for Kharkiv from here. And what does Donald Trump say? Did I ever say that? What are you talking about? That's the next question. And Putin will say the same. What did I say? You misunderstood me. And anyway, look at me. I haven't gone anywhere. I haven't flown anywhere. You see? Russia, that is, so what has changed recently? Russia no longer wants all four regions, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, and Crimea. It wants all of Donetsk and Luhansk, and just the parts that are occupied in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia. Well, naturally Crimea too, and recognize Crimea as well. It's really amazing. Trump turned out to be a super negotiator, completely accepting the proposal of his opponent, who is actually in a weaker position. In other words, to use Trump's own language, he was sitting at the table with the best hand, just to make it clearer, and then he threw away those cards without even realizing that his opponent might have a much worse combination. Or rather, understanding this, that's the thing here. I don't know, maybe I should reread Donald Trump's book, The Art of the Deal, again. The very first point in there should be immediately agree to all your opponent's proposals. That's it, the book is closed. And let me remind you, Putin isn't conceding anything. He isn't conceding anything because what he's giving up is territory that's occupied, territory that isn't even his. As for Putin's written guarantee that he won't attack again, I won't even comment on that. And honestly, the same goes for any guarantees from the US, if there ever are any. Then there's China, which is also being considered as a guarantor. Maybe, well, because there's the Budapest Memorandum, where there are two guarantors of territorial integrity and sovereignty. One of them, Russia, later attacks us, and the other, the United States, demands that we give up part of our territory to this one. These are the two guarantors in the Budapest Memorandum, under which we gave up our nuclear weapons. Well, there are also the Khasavyurt Accords. So the Kremlin doesn't even need to come up with a new scheme for how not to comply with what Putin signs. You and I both know that, well, I think from the moment he was born, his first word was already a lie when he said it in this life, when Putin was born. By the way, let me remind you, during the First Chechen War, that's when Maskhadov and Lebed signed the Khasavyurt Accords and Russia withdrew its troops. That's how the First Chechen War ended. And then, in 1996, suddenly 93 deputies of the State Duma appealed to check the constitutionality of these signed Khasavyurt Accords, because it seemed at the time that the constitution had been violated, since the inviolability of the territory of the Russian Federation is enshrined in the constitution. And here it seemed like Chechnya wanted to determine its own fate. So everything that was signed is just nonsense. Moving on. We all remember very well what happened next. Apartment bombings. Putin and Patrushev blew them up, blamed everything on the Chechens, and that set everything in motion. In other words, nullifying agreements is the easiest thing in the world. Come on, what kind of agreements can you have with Putin, please? That's exactly why I mentioned the same scheme. And a year later, some State Duma deputies will appeal to the Constitutional Court of the Russian Federation and say, listen, we incorporated 4 regions in full, but here it's somehow not complete. We need to check the constitutionality of these documents. In other words, after the First Chechen War, Russia essentially admitted defeat to Chechnya. Just imagine, this gigantic, vast Russia with its entire army lost to Chechnya, proud Chechnya, which fought for its independence, and they had to resort to deception, to some terrorist attacks, so that later, well, what happened. They installed the Kadyrov family there, and those Kadyrovs are still in power now. This is, of course, utter madness. So, to wrap up this question, the only real security guarantee for Ukraine is joining NATO. And we'll talk about that a bit later. And nuclear weapons. Ideally both. Those are the only true security guarantees. By the way, friends, we have a new important fundraising campaign. Recently, my acquaintance Volodya wrote to me. He serves in the 1st Medical Battalion, in the 1st BAT. He wrote saying, we watch the channel, we see how people are helping. That's right. You know, I've personally seen it so many times, on countless occasions. Our dedicated defenders, they truly never ask for anything extra or additional unless it's absolutely and genuinely necessary for the situation. So I said, Volodya, what do you need? And he said, right now we have a MOL. MOL is an unmanned system for evacuating the wounded. It's on wheels, an all-terrain vehicle with airless tires. So even if something hits them, it doesn't puncture. And the capsule on top is armored, so under bullets and shrapnel, you can put a soldier inside and take him to safety. This large, all-terrain unmanned vehicle carries them away. It's an awesome thing, it really saves lives. So I decided, with your help, to support the 1st Medical Battalion with these. This really truly means actual lives saved. And when I was reading about the Medical Battalion, they did a really great job showing the pre-war stories of those who served there and who they are now. I see there are a lot of young people, guys and girls, you know, such bright, genuine people. Well, they're medics, they save lives. So let's help them get these mollies. It's a really important cause. By the way, I'll show you a video now. One of the mollies, this was recorded specifically for our channel. One of the mollies is standing right behind this guy.
Evacuating the wounded is one of the toughest challenges on the front lines today. Together with Borys Tizenhausen's channel, the 1st Medical Battalion is raising funds for ground-based unmanned systems to evacuate the wounded, MOL. Your 100 hryvnias can save a life. Thank you all for your support.
So, friends, let's help our medics, the 1st Medical Battalion. The donation link is in the description of this video and also in the comments. There's also PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. There's Mono as well. You are awesome. I never stop telling you that. Together, we're doing a very, very important and good thing. And by the way, huge thanks from the 101st Brigade for the fiber optic FPVs. There will be a video soon. Everything is already being purchased, and soon it will be flying at all those invaders. Let me remind you, they're in Chasiv Yar. If you're suddenly watching this not on my channel, here's a QR code. It leads directly to the donation jar. And European leaders are flying to Washington together with Volodymyr Zelensky. Let me remind you, the meeting will take place on Monday, and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni stated that Trump supports the idea of security guarantees for Ukraine based on Article 5 of the NATO Charter, but without Ukraine's membership in the alliance. How could that possibly work, I wonder? Let's figure it out. The key issue, and I'll quote her, the key issue remains security guarantees to prevent new Russian invasions. And it was precisely in this regard that the most interesting news came out of Anchorage. President Trump today returned to the Italian idea of security guarantees inspired by NATO's Article 5. The starting point of this proposal is the establishment of a collective security arrangement that would allow Ukraine to receive support from all its partners. So, what exactly is the interesting news? I think the main point is that Putin has in principle agreed that Ukraine may receive NATO guarantees without actually joining NATO, because at this point we don't even know if the alliance members would actually uphold Article 5 if one of the real current NATO members were attacked, let alone if a non-member of the North Atlantic Alliance were attacked. And this Article 5, it implies the principle of collective security. If one country is attacked, everyone is supposed to provide support. But so far, throughout all this time, this article has never actually been applied in this way in a combat situation. In other words, no one knows if there would actually be protection. Would there be protection from everyone or not from everyone? Officially, neither Putin nor Trump has confirmed their agreement. But since there was a leak, I think that means this clause does exist. In fact, this fifth article, it doesn't actually specify mandatory military assistance. So each country, that's the catch. Let's say one of the NATO countries is attacked, then each country decides for itself how it will provide assistance. It could be 5,000 first aid kits, it could be some urgent message, it could be humanitarian aid, or it could be weapons or even troops. So who decides? But that's a good question, right? NATO hasn't been tested for resilience in this way yet. So I won't read you the entire text of Article 5, but here's this one paragraph. So what is a country supposed to do if someone is attacked by an enemy? Actions that are considered necessary, including the use of NATO armed forces, including actions that are considered necessary, meaning it's not mandatory. So in general, what should we be watching for in the next 72 hours? First, who exactly will be on the team meeting with Trump at the White House? Well, for now, that's clear. It seems like the president of Finland will be there as well. I think Macron will probably be there too. Merz, he interrupted his vacation because of this emergency meeting. Naturally, Meloni will be there. And well, Starmer will probably be there too. So we'll see. Well, at the very least, President Zelensky certainly won't be standing alone against Trump, Vance, Rubio, and so on. He will have some support. Well, we'll see. So basically, we're waiting. I think that's exactly the proposal that will be on the table. Putin wants all of Donbas and a freeze on all fronts. But Ukraine has already responded that they're not giving up their territories. And then, like a devil from Nizhny Tagil, well, not from Nizhny. I mean, I'm talking about the Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, who popped up out of nowhere like a jack-in-the-box, as always. He's actually happy, even jumping for joy. He and Orban are rubbing their hands together like little flies because now, if suddenly the sanctions on Russia are lifted, Russian oil will start flowing, Russian gas will come in, the grey schemes will start working again, and they'll be able to make money again. So the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico, stated that the peace agreement should include guarantees for both Ukraine and Russia. Oh, well done. Quoting him, "The coming days will show whether the major players in the European Union will support the peace process and bring the Ukrainian conflict to an end. Or will the unsuccessful European strategy of trying to weaken Russia through this conflict by providing incredible financial, political, or military aid to Kyiv continue?" He doesn't worry about his own country as much as he does about Russia and Putin. What a jackal-like loyalty, right? Such loyalty. As for the unsuccessful strategy to weaken Russia, it's not so unsuccessful after all. As soon as sanctions appeared on the horizon, Russians started scurrying around like cockroaches. If the days of Ronald Reagan's economic and political policies were to return, Russia would have already fragmented and broken apart, much like the former Soviet Union did. And then, this Muscovy would have been renamed back to Kuchkovo. So there you have it, Muscovy plus the surrounding swamps. That's it. That's all that would be left of Russia. But this is the era of wheeler dealers, a time of absent principles, a lack of justice, and, well, jackal-like loyalty. The question is, if our European partners hadn't been so cautious every time, Russia would already have no refineries, no ports, no Alabuga, and no other factories left. Let's be completely honest, Putin was indeed given the ample chance to survive, to continue to wage his war, and to preserve what most normal people would typically call saving face. That's all there is to it. And yes, Trump is planning to hold a trilateral meeting as soon as August 22, so that's very soon. It's happening next week. So he wants to first meet with Zelensky and the European leaders, present Putin's proposal and say, take it, there won't be a better offer. Or, I still won't impose any sanctions. Or I'll just get up from the table and walk away. I've brought you a great deal, and if you don't want it, that's on you, and so on. I think that's roughly how the conversation will go. By the way, speaking of refineries, another Lukoil refinery in Volgograd has shut down. It's huge, one of the top ones, processing almost 15 million tons. Like I said, this is already the fourth refinery that's about to have problems. I'm reading Crimean news. They already have no gasoline at the gas stations there. So after just a few weeks of these serious strikes, Russia will lose half of its refining capacity and there will be major fuel problems. But this news, I just couldn't pass it by. I want you to hear it too. A minister from Tatarstan urged Russians not to be afraid of the Taliban and called them kind Barmalis. I mean the Taliban. I'm mentioning this news in the context of this new club of shared interests. Russians are going on vacation to North Korea. Don't be afraid of the Taliban. They're kind Barmalis. So all of this, it's all coming together, being cemented. There's Iran, there's China, there's Belarus, and so on. So this whole group, they stand up for each other. They understand that if they're taken out one by one, they're done for. If only our European and overseas partners behave the same way. So, the Minister of Industry and Trade of Tatarstan stated that Russia has a distorted view of the Taliban movement, those who are in power in Afghanistan, let me remind you, and that many people are afraid to go to Afghanistan because the Taliban are portrayed as very scary villains, like Barmalay. In reality, they are kind Barmalays, said the minister. Yes. And he also said that women in Afghanistan, let me remind you, they are forbidden even to speak on the street. Schools have been closed, everything has been shut down, they are not allowed to go anywhere, speak, look at anything, nothing. But the minister said that everything is fine with women there, everything is just great. So I think that what we'll see is a kind of fusion, a sort of orthodox Taliban. That's probably what will happen in the Russian Federation. A fusion of information vacuuming like in North Korea, plus all this other craziness. From the Russian Orthodox Church as well, including the Gulag repressions. So that's the kind of wonderful regime we're going to have. It's already there. And let me just remind you of the kind of laws those kind Baramalay have. Music is banned. Performing or listening to it is considered a sin. Instruments are destroyed. What a wild medieval state of things. It's just horrifying. Cinema and television banned. Photography is banned, as are images of people and animals. They interpret them as idolatry. Well, I've already mentioned the situation with women. There, women are forbidden to work or even move around freely. Before the arrival of the US in 2001, before the fall of the Taliban, then suddenly they flourished there and took over. By the way, a big shout out to the brilliant super policy of US agreements in Afghanistan. We all remember when people were trying to escape by clinging to airplane landing gear, realizing that their lives were over, the Taliban had already arrived. So, before the Taliban came, or rather before their fall when they were leaving, they blew up the giant Buddha statues, destroying a piece of history just like that, because their law is against idolatry. But what about a photo of a dog? How is that idolatry? What kind of nonsense is that? Well, in Iran too, by the way, they have their own quirks. Radical Islamization. With this strange worldview, by the way, the Taliban, before the United States came, they would calmly hold executions in stadiums, stoning people to death. I don't know, maybe they still do, but there's no information coming from there. So that's what they're like, these so-called kind Barbalays. I understand that all of this is ignorance and lack of education, fanaticism that goes against common sense, and it's all due to poor education. People have been given the internet, they have it now. Get new knowledge, train your critical thinking. No, now it's all the same, just with the internet. Shamans, sorcerers. Just out of curiosity, I checked the latest news on this topic. Well, I thought, maybe the world hasn't gone completely off track after all. No, get ready. Fasten your seatbelts of common sense. So 10, well, no, not 10, it's less than that. So in Austria, women organized an occult project. They took 2 million from clients. Wonderful. This is all happening now. People are bringing it themselves. In China, instead of letting an actress rest, they performed an exorcism ritual on her. There's a big, very serious scandal going on there right now. They called in a shaman. She told everyone about it. After that, they decided to cancel her in the acting industry. Well, in Bashkiria, here everything is stable. The mother of fire would set towels on fire, soak them in alcohol, and wave them around people. If that's not the mother of fire, then what is, right? Everything is stable here. You know what surprised me? It turns out, I didn't know this, that the fiancé of Norwegian Princess Märtha Louise is a neo-shaman. His name is Durek Verret. So, this neo-shaman married Märtha Louise. Previously, he became famous for claiming that cancer can be cured using shamanic methods. Well, we have our own characters like that too. And according to a study, or rather, according to one researcher, this fiancé of Norwegian Princess Märtha Louise is promoting his own version of the reptilian conspiracy theory. All of this is happening right now. It's all happening at this moment, and he has a huge number of followers. By the way, here's another very telling example. Reporters in Russia, in the city of Oryol, attended an exorcism session, and there people were screaming, swearing, falling down, and writhing. Listen, people were falling, writhing, screaming, and swearing, but that's how all of Russia behaves. How is that even news? In Indonesia, local shamans promised to double people's money using the power of spirits, collected millions of dollars, and then disappeared. So, with the power of the spirit, we'll double your money? We'll double it. Give me 50,000 and tomorrow you'll have 100. This is basically MMM in the world of shamanism. And here comes the most telling moment. In South Korea, there was a high-profile case involving a shaman who charged clients up to, well, around $70,000 for exorcising evil spirits. And the court acquitted him because they decided that people paid voluntarily, which means there was no fraud. The decision shocked the public. So, in other words, the fact that someone paid $70,000 for exorcising evil spirits doesn't shock anyone. But the fact that he was acquitted like that does. Over there in Russia, they have another shaman. I call him the smoker's shaman, because the healthy person's shaman was locked up in a psychiatric hospital. I'm talking about Gabyshev. So, the smoker's shaman, he's the one jumping around in leather leggings yelling, "I'm Russian." Just so you understand, now in schools they're analyzing this shaman's songs and discussing their meaning. You know, like it used to be in school. Like, on the flute of drain pipes, what did the author mean by that? And now they're analyzing this. My blood is from my father. What did the author mean by that? Amazing. Well, as for Gabyshev, I haven't heard about him in a long time. Let me remind you, he's the shaman they called the warrior shaman.